Thank you, and welcome everyone. Looks like a pretty good turnout. I'd like to welcome you all to Embassy Suites. Hopefully it wasn't too far for those of you from the district office or even across town. We have a great opportunity today. For the last day and a half, we have hosted the Caltrans Executive Board, which are all my counterparts, the 12 district directors from around the state, as well as our director and all the deputies from headquarters. So it's kind of the management team. They got to experience the harsh winters we have down here on the Central Coast. I did point out last week's weather. But anyway, we had a chance to go over a lot of things of statewide importance, and we also had a chance to highlight some of the things we're doing here in the district. It was a really good meeting. We had a lot of help from people setting it up, so thank you for all that. But today, this afternoon, we have the opportunity to hear directly from, I think in my email I called them some of the most dynamic transportation leaders in the country. Just to let you know what bar I set for you guys. And I think the department is in really good hands with our current director and agency secretary, and I'm very glad they found time to come down, talk to us a little about the strategic direction we're heading, other things they wish to share with us. We've had some questions submitted. I think we had asked for questions. They went to Julia. This is a small enough room that we may just open it up for questions at the end, and then if you've submitted a question and it's not covered, I can read those at the end, but it might mean a little more if you guys can word it directly to our leaders. And with that, and no more preamble from me, it's my great pleasure to introduce my boss, the director of Caltrans through the state, Malcolm Dougherty.
So I had asked this question before earlier in my career when I worked in District 6, and Tim was giving you some background of the meeting we've held over the last day and a half with the executive board. So I'm going to ask you, now I know some people in the front row know the answer to this question, but do you know how often that we get together and meet with all the district directors?
Monthly.
So I heard quarterly and once a month. It is once a month, and that's not the important part of this question. The important part of this question is, if you don't know how often we're meeting, then you don't know what we're talking about. And I want to make sure that we improve on that, so not necessarily that now you know we meet once a month, but I want to make sure that you're aware of what conversations we're having at that level that affect the Department of Transportation, so that you at least have that in perspective when you're going about your business. So we're going to work on communication within the department as well as externally and telling our story. But that was just when you were given the background of the executive board. When I asked that question, I used to do brown bag lunches when I was the director at District 6, and I asked that question. There wasn't this many people in the room, but only one individual knew that. And when I realized that, I realized that you don't know what we're talking about at that level, and I think that that's something that's pretty important. We should do a better job of sharing that information with you. Tim also highlighted that he gave background of the district here on the Central Coast to the rest of the state. And about 5 slides in, I asked him if it was a recruitment presentation because he was really highlighting it is. I mean, you all know it's a very nice part of the state. It's a nice place to live, and it's hopefully a nice place to work as well. So on that note, let me thank Tim and your executive team, but also thank all of you for everything that you do. District 5 is a district that I'm very familiar with. It's a very successful district. You have a long track record of success from planning to project delivery activities to maintenance and operations, and I just want to share that sentiment with you. It is not unnoticed when good things are happening around the state and in the district, and I do know that it's because of all the hard work that you put in to achieve those things. And then we'll give you the credit, and then we'll give Tim the blame when it goes bad. And the other thing that I'll offer up is when we open it up to questions, if you're a little shy about asking Brian and I questions, you can ask Tim questions in front of us to warm up, and that'll be fun for Brian and I. So we can always try it that way as well. Yes, sir. So a couple of things I wanted to talk about. I wanted to come, and Brian, Secretary Kelly, and I have been, Brian's running. We've actually been making our way around the state and visiting with as many districts as we possibly can. We're probably a little more than halfway through that tour. So it gives us a chance to give you a little bit of background. A couple of things I want to talk about is, from my perception, how we got to the mission, vision, and goals, and what the inputters were to get to it, and what the mission, vision, and goals mean to me, such that you can have that backroom conversation vantage point when we were residing on the new mission, vision, and goals at the executive board, which was the final decision body to adopt that. And I want to give you some of that brief background as to how we got there. I'll give you a little bit of an update. There are some exciting conversations going on in Sacramento about transportation funding, both from the administration, the Assembly, and the Senate in state government. And I just want to share that with you and give you some perspective or indication of what may be on our horizon and what we may need to be thinking about. And then I usually open and or close any talk I have with employees by talking about safety. So I'll mention it now and I'll probably come back to it at the end. It's a very selfish conversation for me because I certainly want to watch out for my safety throughout my career, but I also want you to watch out for your safety. Our job as management team is to make sure that we have good procedures and good safety equipment and processes and things like that. But we're depending on you to follow those procedures and follow those things, and then take your own safety and your co-workers' safety into mind before you undertake any activity, especially out in the field where it's a very vulnerable environment. And if there are things that we need to do more of to address safety and ensure the safety of our employees, we also want you to chime in there. So I always want to make sure that I lead off and hopefully close a conversation about safety. So the mission, vision, and goals. We had a lot of feedback over the last couple of years, even back in the last 3 or 4 years. We've had employee surveys and we've had other inputs. Early on in my tenure, even when I was acting, I asked folks to think about the organization as well as our processes and completely evaluate as much of our organization as we possibly could. And that got called the program review, and you may have heard of that. And a lot of good things did come of that. We combined some divisions up in Sacramento. One of the most significant things that did come out of it is we increased delegation down to the districts. I grew up in this organization in the district. I know that all the maintenance and operations, all the construction, all the planning, the partnerships, the project delivery activities, except for the structures, and there's a reason for that, but it all gets done in the districts. And we've talked for years about empowering our employees. Well, you can talk about that, but until you give that decision making to the people who are best to make those decisions, you haven't necessarily done it. And one of the biggest things we did at the culmination of the program review was increase the delegation of decision making in many areas down to the district. Being from the district and being up in headquarters, I used to describe when I got up there, if we're making project level decisions in headquarters, 3 bad things are going to happen. 1, it's going to take a lot longer than it needed to. 2, it's going to be the most conservative answer that you're going to be able to get. And 3, it runs the risk of being contradictory to what you've been working on for 2 years in partnership with your locals, right? So none of those things are good things. We want to define as broad a playing field as we possibly can for you to operate on, and then as long as you're on that playing field, go forth and do great things. Now there'll be times when you need to get off that playing field because the parameters require it, and then you can engage headquarters and we'll get involved. But I want to make sure that we try to increase that delegation. But the program review, as well as an external review, and Brian will probably talk about the external review that we had, and there were some things that we really should take to heart from that external review about thinking more multimodally and being more flexible, thinking about communicating our story and communicating when we're making decisions better and involving our partners. Those are all things that we should glean from that report and take to heart and try to grow from that. We surveyed all our local partners, the RTPAs and the MPOs. When we did the program review, I forgot to mention there was 8 people on that team. 4 of them were from our external partners. 3 of those 4 are former Caltrans employees. And that was strategic because they knew the department from inside, they knew the department from outside, and they were also individuals that I knew had the department and its best interest at heart. So we really have been engaging with our local partners as well. So there's a lot of different areas that we've got input from before we settled on the mission, vision, and goals, and at times we've reached out to the employees to give us some feedback. So this is my explanation of the mission statement, which is to provide a safe, sustainable, efficient, and integrated and efficient transportation system to enhance California's economy and livability. Now, every day you come to work and you know what your tasks are, and you work very diligently as a public servant to achieve those tasks and do it in a way that is respectful of and efficiently using the taxpayers' dollars. But I want to make sure it's clear to us why we do what we do as the Department of Transportation for the state of California, which is a very, very important role. Why we do it is not necessarily just to deliver a project. Why we do it is to not write this document. Why we do it is to not replace this sign, fix this piece of guardrail. Why we do what we do is to enhance the economy and the quality of life of the people using the transportation system in California. Everything we do should be lending to those objectives. That's why we exist. Enhance the economy and improve the livability and the quality of life of the people in California. How we do it is everything you do every day. That's how we do it. But why we do it is to improve the state, make it the best state it can possibly be, and we've chosen to highlight the economy and the livability of the state of California. And then, so the first part of that mission statement, to make it a safe, sustainable, integrated and efficient transportation system, is how we do it. Why is the economy and the livability. Now, I will say this about the mission and the vision statement. I won't require you to memorize it. It's a little more heavy and wordy than the previous mission statement, and there's a reason for that. But I do want you to understand it and understand how it applies to the work that you do. The old mission statement to improve mobility across California was concise, it's easily memorable. I could go anywhere in the state and ask almost anybody, and they go, mobility. I'd at least get mobility out of it. So everybody understood what the mission statement was. But I think we realized we needed to expand on what we meant by mobility. We got some criticism that a lot of people thought we only thought of the automobile when we spoke about mobility. And I don't think that that's a fair assessment across the board, but pockets of our organization that's probably true. And I think it was time that we needed to elaborate on what we meant by mobility, and I think that's what the new mission statement does. The vision statement, we added a vision statement. We didn't have one in the past, and it really gets to be in a performance-driven and innovative organization through teamwork and partnerships and those types of things. And I want you to be familiar with that vision statement as well, because it speaks to what kind of department we are and we will be. And I also want you to be familiar with that as well. And it's even wordier than the mission statement, but all those words are important. So my ask of you is to just be familiar with it and discuss it with your different work groups. So then we got to the goals and updating the goals. What were our objectives? What did we want to accomplish in the context of the new mission statement? And this was not necessarily an overly complicated conversation. I'm a firm believer that everybody who uses the transportation system has the same set of objectives or expectations, if you will. And it doesn't matter whether or not you're using a car, a train, a bus, a bike, or you're walking. You don't want to get killed on the way, so you want it to be safe. You want it to perform as you expect it to perform. If it's going to take you 20 minutes, you expect it to take you 20 minutes. And you want it to be in good condition. I mean, those are three simple objectives for no matter what mode of transportation you're using, and those make up 3 of our 5 goals: safety and health, system performance, and then stewardship and efficiency. And stewardship being a good steward of the taxpayers' dollars, but also being a good steward of the taxpayers' assets, which is the transportation system. And that's where we captured the condition and our requirement to keep it in good condition. So those are those 3. In today's day and age, in this state, in this country, we absolutely have to do it in a sustainable way. So sustainability is the 4th goal, and then we absolutely always will strive for organizational excellence, and that's the 5th goal. It was not that much more complicated. There was a lot more wrangling than just that, and a lot more churning. But I mean, that's where we ended up, and that's why we ended up. Now, in the safety and health, we wanted to also articulate it's not just about the safety of the automobile user, it's the safety of all the different users. Particularly for us, bike and ped comes to mind, and we need to keep that in perspective when we're going about our business. But we also need to recognize what impacts the transportation system, especially the transportation system that we work on, and how it impacts the community and the livability of that community, and how does it all tie together. And that's why that was added in there. But that's kind of the backroom story of how we acquiesced around the 5 goals as well. So I hope that you are looking at each of those documents, getting familiar with them, where we are in the process, is after you get the goals, you have to come up with more specific objectives and then performance metrics for each of those. And we sent out a list of those objectives, and I think we got 1,400 or 1,600 comments back just from our staff. And then the next version of these objectives you'll see will be much more condensed. It'll be, we compiled it a little bit better and consolidated several of the objectives to clearly articulate what the best ones to resonate for that goal were. And then we also got feedback on what the performance metrics should be. We are now putting this in one nice, neat package. I'll have to look and see when Brian's speaking if I have a copy of it in my bag. We're going to put it into a nice, neat package so that all the efforts we've been working on for the last couple of years, which at times has been a little confusing, can be presented to you as members of this organization, and then also for consumption by externals as a strategic plan for 2015 to 2020. And the heart of it is really the mission, the vision, the goals, the objectives, and the performance metrics. And that'll be in there. And we're probably within the next month going to be ready to distribute that to all of you. But that's really where we are in the process for doing the strategic plan and the background on the mission, vision, and goals. So some conversations in Sacramento about transportation funding. In January, the governor in his State of the State address commented that there was a $59 billion backlog of maintenance needs on the state transportation system, and that correlates very closely to our estimate of a $6 billion backlog, $6 billion annual unfunded need for taking care of the existing infrastructure. That Brian will elaborate on this, I believe, but he has a task force called the CTIP group that is going to evaluate, okay, how do we prioritize that? How do we identify what we want to get out of an additional investment, and then how are we going to pay for it? At the same time, or not at the same time, but within the last 2 or 3 weeks, the Speaker of the Assembly came out and made an announcement that they were interested in doing a transportation funding package of $10 billion over 5 years, which would be $2 billion additional investment each year over a 5-year period. The Senate, I think, is going to come out in the next couple of weeks with a proposal for transportation funding as well. Now, all of these 3 conversations have to come together at some point between now and July 1st, hopefully to feed into the next budget cycle so that we can find additional resources. This is a very important conversation now because Prop 1B is essentially sunsetted and we've utilized all those dollars. So that has come, we've invested it, we've gotten great outcomes out of it, and then we're down back to our standard funding levels, which is not going to allow us to keep up with the needs of the transportation system. So how are we going to do that? The good news is the administration, the Senate, and the Assembly appear to be all talking about how to invest more in the transportation system. So now we just have to figure out what the final conversation looks like, and then what we're going to get out of that investment, and then how we're going to pay for it. But that's going to unfold over the next couple of months, and we'll make sure that we keep you informed as that progresses and where it ends up. What it means to us is we need to be prepared to handle an additional investment and effectively and efficiently administer that additional investment and make sure that we get the outcomes that we're investing in. So I mean, that's what we're looking on the horizon as to what resources it would take to be able to do that, what we're going to spend it on, and what the expectations for outcomes from that investment would be. And again, we'll try to keep you informed of that conversation as we go forward. But it is good that all levels of government in Sacramento are talking about that additional investment. So I think now what I'd like to do is introduce Secretary Kelly to give all of you his perspective. I've had the pleasure of working with Brian over the last couple of years, and it's been to my huge benefit to have his level of experience, and he'll give you an overview of his background and where he comes from. And it has been a huge advantage for me in my position to have that as a resource. And besides that, he's generally speaking a good all-around guy. But please help me welcome Secretary Kelly to offer up some comments.
Thank you, Malcolm, and I really want to thank all of you for coming out today. I know you're busy folks. I also want to thank Tim and everybody really for the invitation to come down here. Anytime I get the opportunity to get out of Sacramento, I welcome it. And I guess my only question would be, can I stay a few days? This is a beautiful part of the state. It's really something. The only it's not even a criticism, but the only observation I think needs a little bit of work, and I mentioned this to Tim earlier, was I was driving down 101. I noticed these left-hand on-ramps. Tim, you got to do something about that. Or maybe not. I don't know. Talk to Santa Barbara about that. Good. They know what I'm talking about. Anyway, Malcolm did a really nice job, as he's done in now 5 of these interactions we're having with districts around the state, sort of outlining how we got there with the mission, vision, and goals, and how the department leadership and working with the executive board, we came together on that. I wanted to offer a little bit of why I think the exercise is important, and I think a great opportunity that it provides really for all of us. And so, toward that end, I'm going to tell you a little bit about me, just so you know the perspective that I bring to it. So let me get into that a little bit. I was appointed by Governor Brown to this position originally as the Undersecretary of what used to be BT&H, Business Transportation Housing Agency, back in March of 2012. When I took that position, the department was in the midst of some tough struggles in Sacramento. We had issues on the Bay Bridge, which we still have, but we are working through them. We had, there was a high-profile issue with a major traffic jam on the I-10, where there seemed to be a road communications breakdown. Malcolm was conducting an internal performance review program, and started reading some of the surveys and comments from those who were participating in that, who were observing that the department had a difficult time communicating with external partners on things. So all of this was sort of going on as I took this position. And prior to taking the position, I spent 18 years working in the state Senate. And I worked for 4 Senate leaders. I think some of the names you'll know, but most of them are from the Bay Area. Bill Lockyer was my first boss. And then I had the pleasure of working for John Burton, who was great fun. And then I worked for Don Ferrata from Alameda. And then lastly, the last pro tem who came and went recently was Darrell Steinberg from Sacramento. Transportation policy was always the one policy area that I had as a constant through those entire 18 years. So I did know the department, I did have a relationship with the department, and mostly with the department in District 4 because that's where most of my bosses were from. I share that with you because for me personally, public service means a great deal. To me, it is really the highest honor that one can have, to show up every day, do your job, and not just do it on your behalf, but on behalf of the public. And I say that because I walked into the state capitol every day for 18 years. And you walk into that white building with a big dome, and it's an impressive, ornate-looking building. But I did feel a sense of privilege. I mean, it was a great privilege to work in that capacity for people who cared about the state, and for the betterment of the state going forward. And I know it sounds Pollyannish, and particularly in a cynical times we are in, but it's vitally important to me. And it's not just elected or appointed people who have that opportunity. It's all of you, and all of the work that you do. You show up every day, you do whatever element of the job you're doing for the State Department of Transportation. But collectively, it's not all about you. The work is about the people of the state. And Malcolm mentioned that the work is about assuring our economy is prosperous going forward and people have opportunity. Goods get to market, people get to work, people get home. It's also about quality of life. And it's not just about me. It's about all of us collectively. And so I want to just spend a minute to say that's what I bring to this job. And I have the highest regard for people who are in this field, all of you, not just the elected and appointed officials, but all of us collectively. I say that because when I got here and I saw the challenges that the department was having, what's important to me is that the department is viewed as working, as functional, as an entity that's going to be part of our solutions, not just today, but going forward, as we meet today's transportation challenges and tomorrow's. And that the Department of Transportation is not irrelevant, but leading on those things. And that's why, coming in, seeing some challenges, seeing Malcolm lead the charge on an internal performance review, I thought it made sense to also get an external performance review, which we got, and a group out of Wisconsin, SSTI, did some work, interviewed 109 people up and down the state, made some observations about the department that people shared with them who were very familiar with the department both inside and out. And I want to say it's not that I agree with all 46 recommendations that came out of that process, or not that I think we ought to run out and do necessarily all 46, but I think the conversation was a very important conversation, because the old political adage that I'm used to is you don't let others define you, you define yourself. And I am thrilled that we are now at the place where the work we're doing is defining what the department is about today, and what the department is going to be about for the next couple of decades. And our transportation challenges are changing. They are emerging. For many years we've built this great state highway system, and we want it to be safe, and we want to make sure that people can access it and get through it. And that's been our focus. But increasingly, the transportation focus is requiring more out of the transportation sector. It's not just safety and mobility today, it's safety, it's mobility, and as Malcolm said, it's sustainability. We have policies throughout the state of California now where we have to meet very specific air quality objectives, including the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. 40% of those come out of this sector. So the question became, who's going to lead on that at the state level, especially in the transportation sector? Legislature had passed some bills in the later mid to late 2000s that said we're going to give that challenge to the regions and locals. We're going to have them do planning, land use planning on how they're going to meet transportation needs and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And they didn't really challenge the department to be part of that answer. I think that was a mistake. And as long as I'm here, I think we have a role in all this. And I think we have to show leadership in all this. I think the partnerships we have with the locals and the regions are very important together in how we get there on this stuff. It's also why the governor in this administration is taking the lead on a project that I know is controversial around the state, but on developing the high-speed rail system in California. And I say it because it's one of those projects that certainly the intent and what we've seen in other countries that have it is a project that will help us meet safety, mobility, and sustainability objectives. I've had the luxury of riding high-speed rail in other countries where it's available, and I can tell you a couple of things. One, it's used. It is widely used. I mean, my most recent opportunity was in Spain. I took it from Madrid to Barcelona. We went 325 miles in 2 hours and 25 minutes, and the train was packed. It was 8 o'clock in the morning. Even the bar car was packed. And I wasn't in the bar car. At 8 a.m. But 9:15? No. Yeah, exactly. Anyway, look, I say it because we've been focusing our time and our effort in Sacramento on bringing along projects like that that look a little bit forward. In California, we're calling that an innovative project, and around the world, they're calling it a routine project because high-speed rail is used and, as I said, functional and available to people. We look at it in California and we say, what mobility choice are we providing Californians to get from Northern California to Southern California today? And it's pretty bleak. There's really one. You drive or you fly. Well, I guess it's two. But flying, the problem with flying is, you know, I think the number I just saw recently was 1 in 4 flights between Northern California and Southern California are delayed every day. And if anybody's ever, you know, I mean, we've all experienced, you know, my flight might be on time or might not. Our rail option, our passenger rail option from the south to the north today is you know, the once a day coastal trip that's about 12 hours. Or another option is the train and a couple of buses that's about 8.5 hours or 8 hours. That's not providing mobility choice for Californians. It's just not. And that's increasingly important as we go forward because of the trends in our population. 2 things I just want to point to on that. One, this group called the Millennials, which I am too old to be a part of. But the Millennials are living differently and they're seeking different options to get around. They tend to be a little bit more urban. Things like car ownership is less important to that group, and they want alternatives to move. We see this in the household surveys that the department does. we see that reflected. Recently, the U.S. Secretary of Transportation, Anthony Fox, was in California. They put out a look-ahead 30-year program, and he noted that the millennials in that program are also not much less interested in single occupancy vehicle travel, but wanting options of how they get around, more urbanized living, as I said, less interest in car ownership. The other trend that he put out that I thought was interesting was our aging population. Between now and 2040, the set that's over 65 years old will increase by 81%. Single occupant driving for that age group is a challenge. And I say that seriously. I mean, my own father, when he turned 75, we had that hard conversation with his doctor where he could no longer drive. And increasingly with our population shift, providing viable mobility choices is part of our challenge, part of our objective. The good news is it enables us to meet the demand that's coming and also meet our objectives that are beyond just serving the customer, but that safety, mobility, and sustainability objective. So that's what's before us. I think it's really important, as I said, that in adopting a new mission, vision, and goals for the department, and laying out a new set of objectives about how we're going to get there and what we're going to be about, being willing to put out performance measures that we will be tested against, and reporting to the public on how we're doing on those. That, to me, is about us defining ourselves and us telling our story. And I think that's been a challenge for the department. I mean, there's an old adage that says the extroverted engineer is the one who's staring at your shoes. So maybe we've had some hard times communicating about what we do, because I do think the department for years and years has done a lot of great things on the sustainability front. But the story has not been conveyed well. One of the things I found when I first started, just to reiterate that point, is I was into this job, and occasionally I'd hear about different things that divisions in the department are doing. I heard great things about an idea to change all the light bulbs and the traffic signals on the state system to LED bulbs. I heard about new material we were using, some of the asphalt that had our recycled tire rate way up. I heard about solar installations on some of our facilities, our stationary facilities. Really excited about new technology on the signs that are on the highway system that are such high reflective technology or material that you would no longer need lights to light them at night, and you'd also reduce the need or the ability for people to access those signs and make graffiti. So all of these things were occurring in different divisions of the department, but we weren't talking about it. We weren't saying, here's what we are doing collectively on the sustainability challenge and how we are meeting it, how we're leading it. So Malcolm put together a compendium of those activities and said, here's things we're doing internally just as a matter of our practice on the sustainability front. People were impressed by that. It was very well received in Sacramento. We need to continue down that path and on that front. That's internal. External, again, working with our local partners to help them meet the objectives that are laid out in SB 375, which are the regional plans that folks are adopting to meet the safety, mobility, and sustainability objectives. The department needs to be a partner in that, a strong partner in that, and leading in that. And I've seen examples of that up and down the state as we're doing this tour. In Reading, Highway 277, I think it is, that goes into downtown Reading, 4 lanes going into Main Street. They repaved it and had to restripe it. The community wanted a conversation about whether it should be 2 lanes with a bike lane or keep it at the 4. The community really wanted the 2 lanes in the bike lane. It was restriped that way. Reading loves it. Caltrans is part of that decision. Hasn't been a problem with the traffic levels in Main Street. It's been great. That's an example of sort of kind of partnering to get to these objectives that we're looking for. We've also done some things on the funding side where our focus has really been on, again, that partnering with the locals and the kinds of things they're trying to do. I mentioned, or I should mention, that we've put together an active transportation program, which was a way for us in California to recognize at the state level, recognize that the regions are, in their 375 plans, are putting more emphasis on bike and pedestrian facilities and wanting to see more of those as they community build. So we put together an active transportation program that really took disparate small bike and pedestrian programs and combined them into a larger, more powerful program in that area, put some federal money in that program, and now we're operating a much more robust program. We're going to have challenges certainly in delivering those. It always seems to be a challenge with those projects, but we need to be helpful in making sure that those projects are coming forward and are being delivered. But there's a very good partnership going on with the state and the locals on those. We're using cap and trade dollars that are starting to come into the state to fund, again, some more of those bike and pedestrian facilities. We're also doing transit grants for new transit facilities and other things to help build communities around the state. That's a very good thing for us to do. And again, the department and the agency are showing leadership on those things. This year, coming into the budget, the governor has recognized that we spend a lot of time on high-speed rail, we spend time on public transit investments, we spend time on bike and pedestrian things. Those are all good and important things, and they help us meet those objectives. But we also have to take care of the system we have. We recognize that this system was built largely in the two to three decades after World War II, and we certainly owe it to the generation that built it to maintain it and keep it safe and preserve it for future generations. And so the governor's recognized we have a large deferred maintenance funding shortfall, and he opened up the budget this year and called on Republicans and Democrats in the legislature to come together on a funding package. And let's try to get money invested in the condition, in improving the condition of our roads, and getting to great levels of pavement condition, bridge condition, make sure we're operating the system as efficiently as we can. We've come forward with a couple of what are called trailer bills, or bills that are part of the budget proposal to help us do more, including a new authority for Caltrans to participate and lead on managed lanes or priced lanes on the highway system that would allow us to perhaps offer new access, reward carpoolers with lower cost options to use those lanes, but to price them and then use the revenue to help maintain the system, preserve that system. So we've done that. We've got a relinquishment bill out where we want to work with locals on what roads might be better for them to maintain because they're really local serving roads as opposed to interregional roads. And we're going to try to streamline that process as well. So those are a couple things that have come through, and as Malcolm said, the funding picture is being discussed between the governor and the legislative leaders. And I'm confident that we'll make progress on the preservation side as well. So there's a lot going on. Again, I'm really honored to have the opportunity to come down and see you all and spend some time with you, take some questions. Again, anytime you want to invite me down to this part of the state, the answer is yes. I really appreciate being here. I appreciate your time, and I appreciate all the work you do on behalf of the people of the state of California. So thank you for that, and I look forward to taking your questions. Thank you very much.
I'll attempt to open it up to questions, see what questions we have, and if we get through those questions, we can reach in and pull out.
We do have a mic too.
Questions? Oh, there you
I'm sorry, so what are cap and trade funds? Cap and trade funds are funds, the California State Air Resources Board runs an auction for folks to buy allowances from industries that are emitting industries of pollution, utilities, oil, others, fuel refineries. And it generates revenue. And the question that was before the legislature last year is that revenue that's generated through that auction, what should that be spent on? And we were very successful in the budget process last year. We passed a bill called SB 862 that really said, look, about 60% of those revenues should be spent in the transportation corridor, or the transportation sector. And so subsequent to that bill, or pursuant to that bill, we have funds that are, some of it's going to the construction of high-speed rail, the development of that project. So a percentage is going to our agency, and we're working closely with the department to make transit grants available for transit operators for projects that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions and expand transit ridership in the state. There's a low emission transit operating fund as part of that too, that also Caltrans is leading on with ARB. And then there's a percentage that's going to through an entity called the Strategic Growth Council in Sacramento. And this is really where they're making dollars available for, I would say, I kind of want to say community enhancement projects, but it's not limited to that as we know it before. It could be for public transit, it could be for bike and pedestrian facilities, but the idea is to help the communities who are building sustainable communities, help them with their transportation elements of those investments. And so the requirement on the cap and trade dollars is that it has to be used for projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So it's transportation, but the reason you're not hearing, hey, we're building a bunch of new freeway lanes with it is because we've got to hit a very serious greenhouse gas emission reduction, and the law requires a tight nexus on that. But we are using it for transportation purposes, and that process is underway now.
All right, we're ready to get
So Caltrans agents and right-of-way agents are kind of the lowest paid compensation compared to other government agencies. And there's an effort underway right now to try to bring us up as pay parity. And I'm wondering if you will support that effort, and if not, why?
Okay, so I'll try to answer that as best I possibly can with my boss standing next to me. Actually, I mean, it's not something that we haven't talked about before. Now, we have addressed one pay parity issue in the past year, and I was glad to put that in my rearview mirror. But for years, I would always get asked about that pay parity on the engineering side of things. But before I answered those questions, I always made sure to make a point that we have a lot more pay parity issues in the department than just that one. And that one got resolved, and there are other outstanding pay parity issues. And they exist in admin, they exist in maintenance, they exist in planning, they exist in environmental, they exist in right across the whole spectrum. Those conversations have to start through bargaining. The ones that have been successful, the conversations that have been successful have done exactly what you pointed out. You have to compare those salaries to comparable salaries and comparable duty statements in other organizations, and then bring that forward. For me, I get engaged in the conversation, we get engaged in the conversation when they're doing bargaining and they come to the department to ask us for our opinion. Now, there's a morale issue there, but there's also a serious retention and recruitment issue there. And that's a tangible management challenge for me, for the organization. If we're not paying adequate salaries, we don't have the right resources in-house to be able to do those duties. And that's across all those specialties those professions that I mentioned. So that's where we get engaged. I recognize that there are pay parity issues that need to be resolved, not only to appropriately compensate our employees, but also to solve some of the management challenges that I have. And that's what I bring to the table, and that's how I get to chime in a positive way. It also is an equity issue, a fairness issue, and a morale issue, but those generally don't carry the day, right? You've got to kind of make the case for it. My business case for it is I have an organizational challenge with the compensation package in several areas because it's a recruitment and a retention issue. So that's what it comes to for me. And we've been involved in prior conversations, but it's got to start through the bargaining process.
I had a question about the vision for the growth of the department. Do you see, with increased funding, the department actually expanding as far as personnel, or do you see more streamlined, efficient operation with the downsizing? Kind of which way are we kind of staying static?
Well, whatever workload we have, we're going to strive to do it as efficiently as we possibly can. Now, with Prop 1B sunsetting, that large investment of resources, we've been attriting for about the past 5 or 6 years, and we've done it all through voluntary leaves, either retirement, etc. But today, with that program essentially winding up, we're about where we need to be. Between last year and this year, the capital program went down by about 300 PYs. Looking ahead to next year, we're just starting to get the preliminary numbers. We're going to be within a couple of hundred one way or another with the capital program. So I think we're about that right size. And the reason I point the capital program out is that's where there's been the most difference We've actually shrunk 25% in the last 5 or 6 years in the capital program because we knew where we needed to be, and looking ahead 3 years, we made staffing decisions on where we needed to be. So I think we're where we need to be. On the maintenance and the owner-operator side of the house, I think we've been trying to tread water, which is not enough resources to do what we need to do and meet the expectations, because the expectations are never decreasing, they're always increasing. When the time is right, we'll be asking for more resources in the maintenance staff. And actually, part of the conversation with Fix It First and the maintenance backlog, not all of that is capital dollars going into shop projects. I believe some of that is field staff that needs to maintain the facility, at the proper level. Now, going forward, depending on what you come up with as far as the funding package, I look at it slightly different. If you're going to invest $10 billion over 5 years, I've got a short-term program that we've got to address the staffing levels and resources to deliver that program. If that equated to 700, 1,000 people, hell, it'd take us 5 years to hire 1,000 people, right? And we've been around here. So how do you address that workload? But if it's a long-term investment of resources into the infrastructure, then I look at that a little different. What's the long-term plan? So you have to decide what you're trying to address. Ultimately, the legislature decides what resource mix we get to be able to deliver the capital program. But I would look at it differently if it were a short-term 5-year program or a long-term program and how we did it. I would put our staff up against anybody to get the job done, because nobody's going to do it like owner-operator. But there is a good reason why we have that flexible resource at our disposal. And then it's just depending on whether it's 5 years or 20 years, what's the most efficient way to deliver those projects. And that's what will lead the conversation. That's all here, and then we'll come back over here.
I was just curious, any comment on transportation funding possibly being tied to a dollar mileage?
Oh yeah, I actually should probably incorporate this into my comments. I always get this question. So here's the dilemma we have. Vehicle miles traveled in the state of California is going up. Fuel consumption is going down. Now that's not a bad thing. In a lot of ways, that's a good thing, unless you're dependent on fuel consumption to take care of the transportation system, which is where we're at, right? The gas tax has served us well for a long time, but the model's broken going forward, because I think fuel consumption is going to continue to go down. So how do we, on a user basis, pay for the transportation system going forward? Now, I don't know the final answer to this, but we're going to do a pilot on whether or not it's appropriate and effective to charge per lane mile, or per mile that is driven, and whether that's a better methodology. And then your vehicle miles traveled and the user fee, if you will, are tracking parallel, whether they're going up or down. But right now, vehicle miles traveled, the customers we have to accommodate is going up, and fuel consumption is going down, and so we've got to do something. So we're going to explore a road charge per mile as a user fee and see where we go.
Yeah, I'd just add that I think it's the first time in the 20 years I've been working on transportation policy that you look forward now and you see the consumption number on gas really projected downward. And so that does raise this tough funding challenge. Legislature passed a bill last year, SB 1077, which has now been alluded to, asked the California Transportation Commission to put together sort of the structure of a pilot program that then Caltrans could run. You may be aware the state of Oregon has done a lot of work on this already. They had a pilot where they had 5,000 participants in it, and they're seeking ways to expand that pilot further to look at the mileage travel fee or tax. There's a lot of elements about it that I'm intrigued by and think are positive, particularly if you know that gas tax is not going to be the most sustainable way going forward to fund the infrastructure. I do like the idea that people would have a very clear sense of how much demand they're putting on the system and what it costs. I like the idea that from a consumer perspective, you can think about, there's a price to what I'm doing, do I want to do that? It is very much in the exploratory phase right now. I mean, we're going to run this pilot to see, does it make sense? Is it publicly acceptable? Can we administer it? Will it raise significant revenues? Might it become the replacement for the gas tax as we go forward? So those are the challenges that we have. We're calling it the road user charge, as the legislation referred to it as. We're doing the pilot now, and then we owe a report to the legislature in June of 2018 on what the pilot found. But Malcolm and I are tasked to speed that up and to try to get the pilot program going a little bit sooner and get the results sooner, and then we'll see where they are. The hard part in it though, and just to be really candid, it's not, while other places have explored this, it's not really implemented anyway, as a main way of funding transportation. So that challenge is.
It would change the dynamics of the
I think it would. I think it would. So it's definitely worth the exploration. I'm just not sure where we're going. Thank you.
And Brian touched on some of the questions. There's a lot of other questions, privacy, security, and all those things. That's what we need to explore through the pilot. Okay, who's got the mic? Okay.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, what's the status of developing policy and guidelines for self-driving cars?
Good timing. We actually had a presentation on this at the board meeting earlier. I have two departments that are playing in this, Caltrans on one side, and pursuant to legislation that passed in 2012, I think it was SB 1298, it requires the Department of Motor Vehicles to promulgate regulations to allow manufacturers of autonomous or driverless technologies and vehicles to first test those vehicles in California, and then ultimately the rules for operating those vehicles in California. The legislation was very aggressive in terms of the time schedule, and I'm standing here telling you that I think the regulatory process is probably ahead of where the technology is. In other words, we're asked to put the rules out before we know a lot about the technology, and that's not a great place to be. But the Department of Motor Vehicles just last month had a workshop on some of the safety questions that they need to have answered, and we're working, we've already done the testing regulations, those are finished, and now we're working on the operating regulations. And the challenge there is, we have to have some level of confidence that in what we're adopting as regulations, have us in a place where we're saying that will be a safe way to operate those cars and those vehicles. So, and that's a real challenge when you consider that the state of California does not have a NHTSA. We're not the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, right? We're not NHTSA, we don't have a NHTSA. The laws, the legislature said, hey, DMV, you take this up. So we're looking at it, we're working with NHTSA on it, we're working with manufacturers on it, and we will probably be promulgating something on the operating side, at least the rules for it, this year.
There's actually two technologies you can keep your eye out for, autonomous vehicles and connected vehicles. And they're two different paths and they're going to merge, but they're, I think, both technologies that are going to find their way into our vehicles going forward.
Hi. I'd like to better understand our role and funding available for improving bike access. Because often what happens, I work as an environmental planner, and sometimes we're getting a coastal development permit, and the locals would ask us, help them improve the bike access in that project area. And we always say, well, we don't have the funding, it's not part of this project, so are we going to have now?
So I'll hand the mic to Brian, and he can talk about the active transportation program, which is going right to the heart of that. And before I do that, though, I want to make sure that when we start our projects, when we do the planning process, the engineering process, et cetera, to solve a transportation concern or issue anywhere along the system, we need to not only be thinking about the automobile, we need to make sure that whatever project we put out there is thinking about all the different modes and whether or not the appropriate scope should include some of those considerations. So across the board, we should be thinking about this for all our projects and whether or not there's an appropriate scope to include. Now, specifically for bike projects and pedestrian projects, Brian can talk about the active transportation program.
Well, again, when I first came in March of 2012, we had I'll never forget this, we had a sit down around a conference table, and the question about how the state funds bike and pedestrian facilities came up. And one of the things that I observed is that we had 4 or 5 different accounts that were, my word, but sort of ancillary accounts, small, ranging between 7 million and 25 million a year. All 4 of them administered and operated by different state agencies. all 4 of them administered and awarding grants at different times of the year. So it didn't strike me as particularly functional and a real delivery problem in a lot of those projects. So our thought was, look, let's talk about consolidating these into a more robust sort of part of what we do, active transportation program. So let's consolidate the various accounts, put it under one administrative process, have it be transportation based, and we put federal funds into it, and again consolidated all the smaller accounts. It's now about 119 million a year available for this stuff. Under the structures of the program, it's awarded through the county. It's awarded through the we're taking off. Awarded through the California Transportation Commission in a multi-year funding program. About half the money, I'm going off a recollection now, but I think about half the money flows to the regions. I want to say 40% of it is regions with populations over 200,000. 10% is for more rural regions, and then there's about a 50% part that is state competitive grant, where we make Caltrans and CTC make decisions on those. There was some confusion. I've heard this at one of our earlier stops, that folks weren't sure how to access that from the department's perspective. And I clarified when I got back that the department can be an applicant for those projects. And so I think my sense of it is, as you're working with locals on some of these things, looking to that program and applying as part of a solution to what you're working on is the place to go. So we did the first round of funding last year for a 2-year horizon. We'll do the next round coming up. But it's got to be pretty robust. It's wildly popular at the regional and local level. And I do think it's a way for us to put this kind of money on the table and fund this project.
Is there somebody over here? Okay, one, and then I'll hop over to the other one.
I was just interested when you spoke earlier about having visited other countries and ridden high-speed rail. And I see a lot of innovative things happening in other states with solar highways and things like that. And I know Caltrans has a research division, but they're sort of, I don't know what they really do. And how do we get some of the innovative ideas that we see other places as a pilot at Caltrans? Or how do we think outside the box, and where do we go with those ideas?
I'll let Malcolm take this up, but one thing I would observe is that the research division talked to us this morning about work it's doing, working with the federal government, both to help local transit operators access FTA grants for some of the autonomous vehicle stuff in transit vehicles. They're also talking about areas in the state where we're going to be the pilot place for the connected vehicles. And so there's places where they're researching this now. They're using UC Berkeley professor to help with some of this stuff, and they're advising on the DMV regulations as well. So they're, in that sense, they're doing some of those things. We also put out a lot of money, not necessarily on the Caltrans side, but through ARB for developing alternative fuel stations and infrastructure throughout the state. And that's increased mightily under this administration, so it's happening on that side too. But with respect to the other things in the research division, I'm not.
So our division chief for the Division of Research and Innovation was actually in our meeting this morning and was helping partake in the presentation, and that was on autonomous and connected vehicles. But we work very closely with academic institutions throughout the state, and we match federal funds for them to do research for transportation institutes. And then we also are in pooled research funds through the Transportation Research Board. I actually sit on the executive board for the Transportation Research Board. There's also other organizations like ITS America, the Intelligent Transportation Society. I'm actually on their board of directors as well. One of the things that I think is a challenge is we are on the cutting edge of a lot of new technologies from a research standpoint and from a knowledge-based standpoint. When it comes to structures and seismic work, I mean, we're leading the way. I actually think California is leading the way on studying sustainability and transportation and where we go from here, and UC Davis is one university that we're partnering with there. New products, we need a more efficient way to consider new products. We are constantly working with other states. We're cooperating with Oregon and Washington and California are talking about an innovative way of making an electrical highway connector for I-5. We're the only state building high-speed rail in the United States right now. I think we need to tell our story a little bit more. We are very frugal with all our research dollars because the ask for research dollars and what we want to invest in is great, and we only have so much. The executive board with all the district directors is actually the decision maker on what we will invest each cycle's research dollars in, and then the division chief for research actually takes direction from that executive board on what we're going to research. She brings to the table all the different opportunities and asks. Knows what our priorities are, but then the executive board makes the final decision. There's always more you can do as far as being innovative and research, but I think we're doing quite a bit, and I'd like to figure out a way to make sure that we disseminate that information a little bit more than we are about what we're doing. But we're very active, structures and seismic, sustainability, we're very active on the connected vehicle and the autonomous vehicle front as well. And then I think the other component that we're very active on is pavement and what the appropriate way to take care of the pavement as it gets older, and then operating the system. And I think that's a huge opportunity for a new front for us to gain ground on, is just what technology can you use to maximize the performance of the existing system that's out there from an owner-operator standpoint. I think there's a huge horizon there as well.
Hi, thanks for doing this. I'm going to do a complete 180 right now because it's the opposite of technology and advancement. I want to ask, why can't we combine funds between divisions on a job? I think.
Blasphemy. No.
What everybody wants to know.
It depends on what you're talking about, but I can tell you this. Very few of our projects anymore only have one fund type on it. Most of our projects, especially our large projects, have anywhere from 5 to 10 funding sources on it. We've gotten really creative on how we fund transportation projects. Now, in our organization, we've got funds to do planning, we've got funds to do project delivery, we've got funds to do maintenance. And those are line items that are described in our budget from the legislature. You shall use this for this, and you shall use this for this, and you shall use this for this. Now, we get as creative as we possibly can, but there are dollars within our organization that are spoken for to do planning, to do, support aeronautics, to deliver projects, to do maintenance, to do administration, to do IT, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Those dollars are a line item described as to what we can do. On the federal side, they give us dollars to use for highways, dollars for transits, and dollars for this. And we've talked about, look, we need to take those shackles off. There's probably some opportunities for us in California government to figure out, all right, if we've got this budget, what's the best way to invest that budget, in all the different activities we do to get to the outcomes that we want. But today, we get it in flavored money for different activities.
Well, since I no longer work there, it's the legislature's fault. I'm kidding if there's a camera. I'm kidding. It's a joke. No, Malcolm knows better than I in terms of the internal use of funding. But one thing that I would observe and something that I'm seeing, I would love us to figure out how we can not just get away from specific colored money, but get away from specific projects and take a more corridor approach on things and recognize that maybe we're using various colors of money for corridor improvements that have several pieces to them, several projects, and be a little, at least test that out and see how we can make more out of that. I am seeing a little bit of that down in San Diego with work that Sandag's doing directly with District 11. But the idea of a corridors approach it's even something that we're passing, seeking legislation to expand the managed lane authority. That brings some tolling dollars on board, but also we'd like to use that money not to just say, what does it mean for that section where they put a toll on, but if that generates any excess revenue, what are the other benefits you can put in that corridor? What are the other things we got to bring to that corridor? What are the other modes that maybe would help get people through the corridor. So I'm very interested in how we can move back a little bit from a project by project piece with the color money in each project and more into a corridors approach. Even if we started that as a pilot of some kind, I'd like to explore that.
Tim has already engaged me in the conversation of having a corridor manager along the 101 in District 5. And then you could start looking at, okay, you know as well as anybody, the number of people and trucks using the corridor, where they're going, what the strain on the transportation system is. What is the best solution? You know, from Santa Barbara to LA, there are rail options that can actually alleviate some of that, combined with some highway options. But if you look at it, and those highway options may or may not be general purpose lanes, they may be managed lanes. But if you look at it holistically, what's the best thing for the corridor to move the people and goods up and down that corridor, and then not be constrained by the color of money, that would be where we would want to be.
And then they can ask for those left-handed on-ramps and off-ramps.
Should I talk about that?
Next question.
As we go through our project development process, we have to go through CEQA. Then after we go through CEQA, we get into the design phase, and then we got to go through a permitting process. And one of the agencies that we have to deal with here on the coast is the Coastal Commission. The challenges are very great. I don't need to say anything else.
I have heard of that.
Is there any possibilities, I mean, what's your position on a relationship with the commission? It's becoming very challenging to get those permits. It's taking a lot of time, a lot of resources, an enormous amount of resources just to get through the process of answering the questions that they have and demands for projects.
Yeah, look, that is a great question and a theme that we're hearing throughout the state in district after district. And I know there's been efforts before, whether it's Caltrans, financing staff at Resources Agency, or the creation at various times of the last 20 years of a, quote, green team or something else to expedite the permitting process. There's been various incarnations of how to improve this working relationship. I will tell you, too, that when I started in this in Sacramento, there is a level of sort of dysfunction in my view, and maybe it's because everybody takes their mission very seriously, and when they see the other's mission as being at all contrary with theirs, it's hard. But one of the things that I was handed as we were visiting Arcata 2 weeks ago, somebody handed me a federal model of how the various resources agencies can work with the transportation agency in a more collaborative way and get together early and quicker on discussions, actually talking and kind of working through these things. So I've talked to Malcolm a little bit about that. We're going to talk to Katrina up in Sacramento about looking at that and seeing if there's not something we can do in California to try to enhance that. I mean, the one thing I will not stand here and say, and just can't, is CEQA is a challenge. It's a challenge for anybody who's building anything anywhere, for sure, but California is a special place, and protecting our resources are part of what we do. And as we move forward in transportation, it will always be part of what we do, but that doesn't mean it should be inefficient. And the question is, how can we make improvements in that area? As I said, I'm looking at a model that an employee handed me, and I'd like to talk to the resources agencies and their leadership in Sacramento about, can we put something together to streamline that and get more cooperative relationships? I think it's important, but I just distinguish that process from a process that says, let's set aside CEQA, which is something that I don't think is appropriate. But I hear you on the efficiency side and trying to get that working relationship better.
I think you very artfully articulated the challenge that we have, and we have heard about it in several of the districts that have the coastline and the Coastal Commission to deal with. For now, we're continually trying to build on the relationship that we have with them to try to make it less onerous, but it still is too onerous. And we want to do the same thing that they want to do and protect our resources, but there's got to be a better way to go about it than the way we're going now. And sometimes reasonableness isn't always obtained in the conversation at the same time.
If I could, and thank you, John, for that comment. To follow up on the Coastal Commission, may just be an observation, but when the Coastal Act was passed, I do believe that it was probably seen in part as a sort of a break on highway development within the coastal zone, and which is probably why transportation was not really specifically excluded or accounted for under the coastal development permit process. And that was almost 40 years ago. So my observation is that 40 years is elapsed. We have new mission and vision. It's probably time for some particular sort of change, perhaps legislative, to bring their agency and our department into alignment with a new understanding. Because that, I think, the reaction to the freeway revolt of the late '60s and early '70s, that's over and done. And so it's time. We've moved on, and I think it's time for them to move on too.
I like how he always hands me the mic on these.
In fairness, you reached for it.
Well, yeah, first time. Here. I think often, I see this in government all the time, but different agencies, commissions, departments get real focused on their specific goals or mission. And in some of that you lose sort of the greater good, or it becomes hard to work through issues. And I think often it's because you start to focus on how you're different, or where your objectives are different than the other agencies. But I'm going to observe that we have a lot of things in common with what their objectives are and what our objectives are. I don't want to, nobody wants to ruin the beautiful coastline of the state of California. And I am seeing some evidence of a better working relationship going forward. I will point to the Coastal Commission permit that was granted for the North I-5 project in San Diego. That is a project that includes a freeway widening, but also includes a rail alternative, a bike and pedestrian alternative, wetlands preservation, all part of a corridor-based approach that the Coastal Commission issued the permit for. So I've seen it there. I know Tim and I were talking earlier about some success he had down here by incorporating a bike element on a stretch down here as well. So I'm, as I said, interested in sort of that model that the federal government started, and see if we can work in Sacramento to get some of our commission and agency leaders together to figure out how we can do this better, more collaboratively. Maybe that takes a bill and maybe it doesn't. But I think we have a lot of things in common as well as differences. And I want to focus on trying to get the leadership anyway to say, look, we all agreed on some things. Now, how do we move forward? And how do we get that going? So that's work I want to take up.
Okay, I think I've gotten most of the hands. I've looked at, and a lot of the questions that were submitted have been covered. One that isn't, and maybe whoever it was didn't want to submit it or question it here. In addition to doing my best at my current job, what else can I do to advance my career at Caltrans? Again, great place to work, longevity, sustainability, words of wisdom?
Well, there's a couple of different ways to look at it. When I've looked at opportunities throughout my career, I've always tried to have a broad base of experience and get as much experience as I possibly can. The first 10 years of my career were in design. But I mean, I didn't really start understanding the department until I worked in maintenance and traffic operations, and then got some planning and project management experience, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's always benefited me as an individual. I also would pay attention to the skill sets of the next position that I would have an interest in. And this actually comes back to some of the role that the department has. Our tradition when we promote people is to make them supervisors, and you usually become a supervisor because you were really good at what you did, which was a technical job. And then when we make you a supervisor, which is a different job, we pat you on the back and wish you luck. Good luck with that. So I think we need to be a little bit more systematic on training not only our technical folks, entry-level folks, supervisors, managers, as well as leadership training. And we have brought back the management training and the leadership training that we're partnered with Sac State. So I think that's part of the responsibility for me. But the other thing is As my career has gone by, I've gone from doing engineering to doing management to looking for money, right? And you know, it's a different set of skills as you move up. Communication skills from where I started to the middle of my career to today are completely different. I actually did things to try to help myself in the communications realm, and did things like Toastmasters and things like that that actually helped me in my career down the road. So there's different skill sets, and there's things you can do to prepare yourself for those skill sets. The best thing I ever did was go from design to maintenance and operations, because I was not the expert in the room when I had a staff meeting. They were. And it really taught me how to rely on the experts around me and delegate work, ask a lot of questions, but I mean, that was a big growth point for me. But I mean, those are the types of things that I recognize, and you can think about as you look to move up in the organization or move into other roles. But we have an obligation to make sure that we're preparing you across the board and everybody equitably to be prepared for that next job as well as be very good at this job. I see those as tools that we're required to give to you.
Okay, this taps on to what you just talked about. Is there any implication that we're going to go back to the rotation program that we have, you and I started in Central Region, which if you came into, well, I came in 92, you had a box. And you rotated from department to department. You went to design, you went to construction, you went to surveys, you went to maintenance, you went to permits. It was great. Now we come in, you're stuck in a queue, or you're out in the field, and you don't understand the agency as a whole.
Yeah. So absolutely, and we're at a point now going forward. For the last couple of years, we've done very selective hiring in a lot of different areas because the attrition rate had to overcome whatever hiring we did. We're at a point now looking forward, I think, that we're going to be at least in a mode of hiring to make up for all the attrition that we do. Now, we do have to have a plan. We may not hire what attritted because we may have different needs today. We may attrit as an engineer and hire a right-of-way agent, et cetera, et cetera. We have to have a plan. But we are at a point where we are going to do a fair amount of hiring to make up for attrition at the very least. Now, it depends on what happens with a funding package. That may drive another conversation. But our expectation is we'll have a rotation program for our engineers, which is already established. It begs another question: what other specialty areas or professions should we have a rotation program? I think that's actually the question I want to answer. A rotation program for engineers is a default for me when we're in a little bit of a hiring mode. Sir, Mr. Safety.
When I've been road safety for a number of years, now I'm a supervisor, one of the supervisors you talked about in maintenance. And I think it's a very good program that you talked about, the rotation. I've seen it over the years. How can the maintenance field get in that kind of rotation? Because they have some excellent people in the field that have gone into engineering and construction and get into rotating around in the maintenance field for that experience.
Well, that's a great question, and actually there's a couple opportunities. I can tell you one thing that I did, and you can build on this in any area. When I was the DDD of maintenance and operations, we had engineers that were working for us, and they were on rotation. They rotated into maintenance design. And I realized how much I didn't know when I went to maintenance and operations, even after working at the Department of Engineering for 10 years. I rotated those engineers out to the maintenance office, in the maintenance regional office, because I knew it would be a huge growth opportunity for them. On the maintenance side of things, we have training and development opportunities, and it has worked out very successful, either doing technician work or in the transportation management centers, because they know the field. And we need to make sure that those opportunities are made readily available in training and development assignments. And then a rotation program is something that maybe we should explore maybe they're not changing professions, but they're getting a broader experience. The biggest disconnect I've ever seen in my career that I tried to close was going from design to being over top of the maintenance organization, because too many of the designers were designing stuff that was not compatible with how it was going to be maintained. And I think that there's a huge opportunity to do that. I'll have to look into it.
As our maintenance needs increase with new capital projects that come on, it doesn't seem like there's a mechanism to actually fund that need. I was wondering if there's been any conversation looking at having capital projects be somewhat responsible for their maintenance needs as we continue to invest in our
Yes, that's a great question. So there is a mechanism, it's not a good mechanism, for increased inventory as well as increased maintenance requirements of aged inventory, right? The needs of an infrastructure that's 50 years old is different than 3 years old. The way it's addressed now is you do a budget change proposal and you go through the budget process to try to, it's not a real easy process, and it's not a model to rely on. So I think one of the things we have to get better at is having an accurate depiction of our inventory, what we want to accomplish, what we would accomplish as far as the level of maintenance once we add resources to it, and then where would we add those resources. And then that'll help fuel that conversation, and hopefully we can get a more systematic way to address the increasing inventory as well as the aging infrastructure. The other point that you made was, you talked about BCP for inventory, and you made another point that was going to trigger a thought. No,
Capital projects paying for the maintenance?
Oh yeah, that was it. Very good. I knew you got your job very good. Life cycle cost analysis. Now, it's not necessarily going to be responsible for it, but it should be identifying what resources are needed to maintain it. Then you've got the information up front. Then it's a budgetary action that's got to be followed up on. And we're talking more and more about that. And we've started to do that, but we've got to get more sophisticated. But that's how you accomplish that, is the life cycle cost analysis in the program when you do the project, to at least identify what you need.
Just on that point, from the external side looking in, one of the reasons we want to pursue the pricing, the managed lane option is if you're going to add some capacity, getting a revenue stream that you're going to be able not just to fund what you're building, but you're going to fund the operation and maintenance over the life of the project. The other place where we've run into a little political hot water is, of course, you're all familiar with the local sales tax measures that often require they have in their expenditure plan a lane to be added to the highway system, and again, it doesn't accommodate for, and rarely do those funding streams of the local side even consider the ongoing rehab maintenance issues. Those are all on us. I think that's a broken system. I put out a report from the agency that flagged this issue, and if we talk about in Sacramento this idea of lowering the vote threshold to pass the local sales taxes, I put on the table, then let's use those for life cycle cost analysis and using the revenue not just for the capital improvement, but for the ongoing maintenance. You can imagine that was received locally, but that's why I make the big bucks. But anyway, it is still something that I want to pursue as we work through some of the issues with the funding sources for transportation. But I think the life cycle cost analysis is the way to go. Even if you're not going to necessarily put the funding on the front end of it, we have to know what that is. We have to understand what that is better as we go forward. So, thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions in the room? I think I've looked at the list and we've exhausted at least the majority of them. Is there any burning? Okay, seeing none. I'd like to just thank you guys for making the trip down here. I know it's not always easy. I appreciate it. I'm sure everyone's appreciated hearing from you. Do you have any parting words?
Yeah, I'll express my appreciation again for the invitation from Tim and for all of you for coming out today. And I always get something out of the questions that we field and make mental notes. There's a theme to some of the questions that we've heard in other districts. I think there's also some specific questions that I think will resonate with me, fielding them from District 5 and the Central Coast. But my sincere appreciation for everything that you do in this organization. I came up through the organization, so I've worked here for 23 years or so, and I've worked in a lot of different areas, so I'm very familiar with all the work that you do and the implication that it has on the state of California. We are the Department of Transportation for the state of California, and I think that that's a huge responsibility, and I think it's something that we need to take very seriously because it impacts everyone's life in California, either living here or visiting. And I think that we do a hell of a job in accomplishing our goal. We have more work to do, but we need those resources to get it. We're going to fight for those resources to get it so we can have them available to you to do what you do in taking care of the transportation system. So familiarize yourself with the new strategic plan when it comes out, understand the mission, the vision, and the goals, and take it to heart when you're doing your daily tasks and planning your work over the weeks and months that you do. So again, my sincere thanks for everything you do. And I'll just make a plug for safety once again. You had a deputy district director here who retired, Steve Price, who was he was Mr. Safety, and he really carried that flag, and he was the champion for safety, I think, in this district. And I think anybody who worked with him would know that that was a focus point for him. And I think it should continue and be a focus point. And it should be a selfish endeavor for you, for your safety and your coworkers' safety. So I said I would open and close with safety, and I wanted to make sure I do that. So, but again, thank you very much for your time.
I too want to just say, thank you for coming out. As Malcolm said, and I really feel the same way, in each and every one of these, I take something away that reinforces either what we're doing or what we need to be looking at or doing that I didn't know before we got here. And, on that theme, look, part of my job in Sacramento and what I'm asked to do in my position is lay out where I think my departments can be the most successful and where my departments can lead. And I'm very passionate about that. And so I have a great investment in your success. We are laying out in the strategic management plan where we think the department should go, but I am incredibly mindful that how successful we are and how we get there is going to depend more on you than me. And I know that. And when I come to these meetings and we have these conversations, I'm telling you, at every one, I leave and there's a little new to-do list as we get back to Sacramento to try to make it work. I work with Malcolm all the time on various things within the department to try to make your lives better and give you a sense of how important you are, your career is, and that you have a path to do what you want to do and define your own success. And I'm very bought into that. So that score, I'm pleased Malcolm brought back some of the leadership training and management programs that have been diminished over time, bringing them back now. And again, I recognize all the important work you all do, and I appreciate it very much. And I certainly thank you for the time you gave us today. So thank you very much.
Yes. Again, thank you, Brian, Malcolm, for coming down. We appreciate it. For everyone that made the trip over here to engage in this, thank you very much. It's always nice to hear directly and have this opportunity to ask questions. Along those lines, on the afternoon of March 11th, I believe it's 2 p.m., but I'd have to go back and check. Malcolm will be hosting a statewide town hall, probably similar, some overlap to this, but again, pushing out what our mission and vision, strategic planning going forward. I'll be working with Julia. Oh, by the way, I'll be working with Julia to set up some rooms because I think it'll be a webinar, but again, there'll probably be some limited bandwidth or limited connection points. So we'll look at trying to get some conference rooms or the video rooms hooked up so we can all listen in or as much as possible. Hopefully out in the maintenance stations too, we can get some setups there on both the north and south ends. But so look forward to that. There'll be more information coming out on that. And again, thank you all for coming. This has been good. If you have just a few other little things, we can probably mill around here for a little bit, a little more informal. But again, thank you, and please join me in thanking once again Malcolm and Brian.